Good morning. We are reviewing and summarizing and concluding the Hemshech Ayin Beis for the second time. Now more informed by the source materials that we learned in the last few months. And we are on we finished page 1369. Let's review what we've learned and where we're headed. So briefly, we are in the middle of the discussion of Mikra, Mishna, Talmud. The Torah breaks into three categories: Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebiksav is named Mikra, the 24 Chav Dalet Sifrei Kodesh of Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, and Torah Shebal Peh breaks into Mishnah and Talmud. So we're actually in the middle of discussing Mishnah, but we finished with Mikra. And these three levels in Torah correspond to three levels of Makabel. Makabel, which is Malchus of Bria, corresponds to Talmud in the world of Bria, Malchus of Yetzirah, which corresponds to Mishnah, and Malchus of Asiya, which corresponds to Mikra. And they're rooted, however, in the exact opposite order as you go back to the source in Atzilus, with Mikra rooted in Chabad, and Mishnah in Chagas, Mides, Zoh, and Talmud in Nehi, in the lower level. And we've explained so far why Mikra is rooted in such a high level, because it's rooted in such a high level, which is higher than Gilui and higher than comprehension. That's why it expresses itself only in the world of Asiya, in action, in narrative, just that without the details, without the Giluyim and elaboration. Mishnah, on the other hand, is rooted in Chagas. Chagas is Midas. Midas is already a Gilui, and a Gilui that relates to existence. So when it manifests in the world, it manifests in Yetzirah, which is already a world of Gilui. And that's what we're in the middle of discussing, that aspect of Mishnah being connected to Midas. We haven't gotten to Talmud yet. We'll do that soon. And then we're going to go back to how these three correspond to the three levels of Makabel, which we know are the three manifestations also of the moonlight, HaLevana, and Even Tev, the luminous stone, the glowing stone, and Riyah, Koyach HaRiyah, the power of eyesight and vision. We'll get back to that when we get back to that. But right now, we're in the middle of the last paragraph. We learned how Zah, in contrast to Atik and Keser, is connected to governing existence. So though, as we finally concluded, in Atzilus there's no Shinui, the Shinuyim that existence is subject to, which is Chesed and Gvura Midas, in Atzilus it's still above Shinui, but it's already the root of it. And when Zah of Atzilus manifests in Zah, or Vav Ksav is the six facets in Yetzirah, that's where, which is what he called Matat, Sareh Shalelam, that's where the Shinuyim, Meshamdim ve'enish, and his spilus that he spoke about. And yet, Atzilus is still not on the level of Keser, which is even further and more removed, just like the Pshitus of Ein Sof, the seamlessness is deeper on the level of Keser than it is on the level of Atzilus. So Atzilus, in a sense, is like in the process, and we know it's all a process for it to make sense. In the process of coming from an immutable divine state that's beyond any type of effect and shinui and changes and so on, from that immutable state to get into a world of shinuyim is a progression. And Atzilus is in between, the interface between L'mayla Mishinui and Shinui, to put it in different language. And that's what we learned, that essentially is the role of Zah of Atzilus. So it's already Midas, in contrast to Chabad. Chabad is completely removed, like we learned earlier, the Zaken, the mature mind, which is not affected altogether by Midas, by the spilus, by the changes of Chesed and Gvura. So Chesed and Gvura of Atzilus is still Elikus, as I explained at length, but it's still all Elikus. But it's the beginnings of what will become Chesed and Gvura in the lower worlds, and namely in Yetzirah, where it will manifest in Sareh Shalelam nar shemispol. That's the level of nar shemispol. Das tachten. And nar itself also goes through stages. At times it's eila tatzilus. So there's shinuyim in the nar itself. Sometimes it's eila to the level of zaken. And afterwards it descends back into the katnus of nar. Tomid ba'aliyas v'yiris was the last line we learned, the bottom of page 1369.
Where is Bria?
Okay.
What
Excuse
about
me?
Bria?
We'll talk about Bria when we get to Talmud. Right now we're talking about Yetzirah. Zoh mekanano b'Yetzirah. So Zoh mides manifest. Yetzirah is the place of the Tzira that he's going to explain later. There was Bria Yetzirah. But right now, speaking about Yetzirah, which is the level of Mishna, after we spoke about Asiya, the level of Mikra. Okay. Now, the next page, 1370, Rabbi Rashab brings us back. This is all, remember, an explanation in the Zohar that he cited in Bereshis 27b on page 1368, that Mishna Isisa Dahu Nar. It's the partner, the Isha of that Nar. Nar is Zah. So what is the Isisa? That's Mishna. And it's also called the Shifchet the Shechina. It's called the Maidservant of the Shechina. So now he's going to come back to explain both those terms. What does it mean, Isisa Danar? And what does it mean, Shifchet the Shechina? That's what we're going to learn now as he comes back to Mishnah after we've explained what Nar is in contrast to Zaken, the age, the sage one. So the top of page 1370. And last week I already gave a pretty overall summary of the context of all of this within the context of the themes of Ayin Beis in general. So I'm not going to do that again. You can go back to that recording. I think it was last Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm not sure. Or even Monday. But regardless, that's definitely a fundamental piece. How Torah, I'll just say one line, I will say, that Torah, which is the interface, Mamayla Lamata, as he began discussing on page 1350, that in Torah itself, there are levels. And there's levels where there's more elikus, pure elikus, unadulterated, and there's elikus as it relates to existence. And that is going to be the difference between Mikra and Mishnah. As we'll see, Mikra does not give us the details of any mitzvah. It gives us the general terms. So it's in the state of what he called before katnus. But in Yetzirah, it takes on details, the mides and so on. So we'll see how he explains all this. So he goes like this. So page 1370, top of the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And this is a continuation of, let's see. Yes. Of the beer of the Tzemach Tzedek and beer Azer, as I mentioned. V'hinei ha-Mishnah nikra Isisa dahu nar. Issa in Aramaic is Isha. Ki ha-Mishnah b'Malchus the Yetzirah. Of course, Malchus is Nukve. Zah refers to the Ish, is the Mashpia. And Isisa is the Makabel, which is, in this case, since Nar is the level of Yetzirah, as he said, Matat Sarish Alelam. So the Issa Vahonar is the level of Malchus of Yetzirah. Shisa Sidre Mishnah. And Vav Ksav is the Malchus the Yetzirah. So remember, Zah is the Vav Ksavis of the 6 Mides of Yetzirah. But then there's in Malchus, there's also Vav Ksavis. There's 6 dimensions within Malchus, and that corresponds to the 6 orders of the Mishnah, Shisa Sidre Mishnah. That's actually the Rosh Tevos of Shas, Shisa Zdorim, Shisa Sidre Mishnah. As we know, there's 6 different sections, which is Zman Nokat, if you want the acronym, is Zroim, Moyed, Noshim, Nezikin rather, and then Noshim, Kotshim, Taris. Sometimes another acronym is Nezem, Cotton, but regardless, Zman Nokat is the order that we learn it in. So these are these six darim correspond to the six sections or the six facets within Malchus of Yetzirah. Ulechein nikra issusa the hainar. Chinas vav ktsav is the zod atzilus. Hamluboshim bevav ktsav is the zod Yetzirah. I don't think it means Hamalubashim, it means Hamalbish. I think he means Hamalbushim. Bevav Ksav is the Zod Yetzirah. Hamalubashim Bevav, because it's the Vav Ksavas of Zod Yetzirah that's Malubish and the Vav Ksavas of Atzilus. I see in the source there's no Vav. Hamalapshim. Here he wrote a Vav. The bottom line is, so that's Issa the Hainad. So Hainad is Vav Ksavas Zod Atzilus. Hamalubashim. I'm sorry, my mistake. No. I stand corrected. I read that wrong. So what's Issa Hainad? Hainad is Vav Ksavas the Zod Atzilus. We said that's the level of Nar. That's Melubish in the Vav Ksavas of Zod Yetzirah. That's really not, but that's why there is, but it originates in the Zod Atzilus. And that is why it's called Issasa. Because this is called Malchus of Yetzirah, which is the Isha, the Makabel, and partner with the Vav Ksavas of Yetzirah, of Zod Yetzirah. Okay. Now the parentheses, let me see, should we learn the parentheses? We learned it already then. Yeah, might as well. So he says, what is this in Aveda? So he says in Aveda, B'china Zuba Aveda, the level in Aveda that this is that Shekedim Esa Katera Tzarech Liyas Tchil Rechimu. Before you learn Torah, you have to have Ava v'Yira. Tchil Rechimu is in Aramaic, Ava and Yira. Or to be more exact, Yira and Ava. Tchil is Yira and Rechimu is Ava. Which is, of course, the sixth, that's Tchil Rechimu. That's the level of Midas. So we see, before we learn Torah, you need to have Midas. Da'araisa b'lei Tchil Rechimu. Torah without Ava and Yira, without love and reverence. And the Chazal say, someone that says they have nothing but Torah, meaning Torah, but they don't have Ava v'Yira, means that Torah itself is also lacking. Shetzarech liyas gam tefillah, because you must have also tefillah together with Torah. So this brings us back to the two interfaces of Torah and tefillah. So tefillah is the inyan of who Hiseirus Ava v'Yira. What does tefillah distinguish from Torah? Torah is Chabad, is learning. You're learning an inyan. But Torah, for it to be complete, needs to also have emotional application. Or more importantly here means emotional hagdama. Shekedim Esa Katera. That before you sit down to learn, you need to have an element of feeling the experience. Not just learning, but feeling it. Say this Ava v'Yira. Once a person has that Ava v'Yira, who b'chinas mored daraisa b'chinas baal the ribon umamshich eden sev b'Torah. Then he becomes, so to speak, a master of Torah, a baal v'ribon, an owner, a master of it, and therefore he can be mamshich eden sev b'Torah, which we're going to learn about later more in detail. So he's explaining this is what Mishna is. That it's a form of the midas, not just the seichel of Torah. It's also connected to Ava v'Yira. That's the Aveda that he's saying here, the Aveda of the Vav Ksavas of Yetzirah, which manifests the Vav Ksavas of Zah, of Atzilus. That's just he's adding what the Aveda of it is. Now the question is, I'm wondering here, there's B'china Zuba Aveda sounds much more, they're talking about Zah, not about Malchus. He just said a minute before that Isasa, the Hainar, is Malchus of Yetzirah, or the Vav Ksovis of in the Malchus of Yetzirah. And here the parenthesis seems to be suggesting is the midas themselves. So the parenthesis seems to really belong to the previous paragraph when he was still talking about the midas. He doesn't spell out what it means in actually Malchus. You have to say, I'm just speculating that when he says in Aveda, it means that the tefillah, when a person is actualizing midas, it's the midas as they are transmitted to Malchus, which is Mishna. So Mishna really is a combination of Zah and Malchus because it's drawing from Zah. It's the Isha of Zah, the Makabel of Zah, and that's. But he doesn't say that explicitly. He just says that you need to have an Aveda Kedem Esakated. You need the Chilu v'Rechimo. Just wanted to point that out. I think later we'll understand it a bit more because at the end of the day, Malchus is always the end of the process. So Zah without Malchus does not give birth. That's why you need Malchus. We learned earlier, the creation, you need to have Malchus to bring it down into action. So it could be that's what he's alluding to. But regardless, that's what he says here. Okay. So that is not. That's Issa Dahainar, Malchus of Yetzirah. And what about Shif? It says, V'ihi Shifcha de Shechinta, the Zer continues and says, this is called Shifcha, the maidservant of the Shechina. Pirush Shechinta b'chinas Malchus da Atzilus. Shechina refers to the level of Malchus of Atzilus. Well, Mishna, she slapshus ateda begashmius. And Mishna, which manifests the Torah begashmi, because Mishna talks about how to actualize the ideas in Torah in actuality. Like we learned, that's what Mishna is, to get through all the details of how you do, what the Torah says, and what it means when it says, or what it says, when it says you're supposed to read Shema. When? The Mishnah asks. So the different discussions in the Mishnah is all about actualizing the mitzvahs of the Torah. So he's saying like this, and that's the role of the Shifcha. That's what a maidservant does. That's what he's going to explain. She actualizes, she implements the guidelines of what the master of the house wants. And there's a parenthesis now, which is not a short parenthesis. Goes back down to almost to the halfway down the page. I'll just read before we get to the parentheses. I'm just going to jump to the end of the process. He says, at the bottom of the paragraph, we'll say, so what is the role of a maidservant? She prepares the foods, sweet foods in the kitchen, ligvirta, to her master, to the woman of the house. So
you mean the man of the house, no?
Huh?
I'm sorry. First of all, what line are you on?
Kaf inyan tikkun. I'm end of the paragraph. Kaf inyan tikkun amacholim u inyan birurim nesusa shenafla b'shvius hakem deklik b'snega. So that's the conclusion. Just to explain why shifcha is Mishnah, because what Mishnah does, it prepares, just like a shifcha. When a woman is working in the kitchen, the shifcha, her maidservant, helps her prepare the foods to be able to prepare them for the meal. So that's what Mishnah does. It takes ideas of Torah and prepares them in a way that we can understand the details and all the specifics. That's what he says at the bottom of the page. Mishna's kosher v'torah muter. It tells us what's kosher and what's pure and what's allowed and what's permitted. So all that is essentially the birur. That's the role of the maidservant. Basically, she takes the amshachos from higher levels and prepares it, like we say, shulchan aruch lifneya, like it says,
Can you
Ela
take a
mishpata,
question?
to prepare it all, like a preparing a meal. Let me finish the whole topic, and then I'll take plenty of questions. So, bottom line is that's what the shivcha is. So that's briefly what he says. So Isasa Dahai Nar, Malchus of Yetzirah, which manifests Malchus of Atzilus, which I should say Zod Yetzirah. So the Isasa of that is Malchus of Yetzirah. Zod Yetzirah manifests Zod of Atzilus, and that is the level of Mishna, the Isasa Malchus of Yetzirah, that channels like a shivcha, all of that into asiya, into an action that we can now perform the mitzvahs properly, because the Mishnah details it all like a shivcha that prepares the meal properly, that in the proper way. Now, this clearly tells us that we talk about nar and gvirta, that's like in the levels of atzilus. But when you're talking about preparing it to be able to eat the foods, meaning then all the details, which is what Mishnah does, that's the role of Malchus of Yetzirah. That's what he's saying here. Now, we're going to go back because he's going to spell it out more in detail to explain the different levels here, what's what. But I just wanted to first sum up how he's explaining what Mishnah is based on the Zohar. Okay. So essentially, in Atzilus, everything is still in a state of the divine blueprint, as we discussed. All the spheres are there, but it's all Elikus. And it's a state of Elikus. It's not ready for us to be able, us meaning Nivrayim, to be able to implement. So true, all Torah originates in Atzilus, and Atzilus itself, we learned Chabad of Atzilus, a Mikra Chabad within Chabad. But in order to bring it down, you needed to come into Midas, but not just Midas of Atzilus, Midas of Yetzirah, and from the Midas into Mishnah, which is Malchus of Yetzirah, and then you have a full activated, actionable Mishnayos that explains all the psukim in the Torah, what the details of all these halachas are. And that's essentially the role of Mishnah. So Mishnah is basically bringing down the higher levels of Torah into something that we can relate to more. Like I explained in the context of interface, Mishnah is Mikra, is more you can say almost undiluted elikus. And that's why the only place it expresses itself is in narrative form and just in plain action. Here, the actionable mitzvahs, do this, do that, without details, without explanation. Mishnah, on the other hand, is Giluyim, is revealing the details and expressing it all like that. That's what Midas do. It breaks it down into different details and explains it and the reasons behind it, so we can then use it to be able to actually do do what it says in the Mikra and the Torah Shebiksav. That's briefly what he says. However, to explain more the specific details, we're now going to go back, and you'll see he's going to qualify and just explain how it stems, how it's consistent with everything we've been learning here. So you want to wait with your questions till we review that. It may answer those questions you may have, or if someone wants to ask, fine. If it's a question that he's going to address, I'll point that out.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the difference between the Isasa of the difference between Isasa and the Shivcha. The Isasa is the Malchus of Yetzirah, and the Shivcha is the Malchus of Atzilus that draws Zah into. No.
Isa's Malchus of Yetzirah, Shivcha is a next level below that. He says that level of Isha, of Nar, is Ihu. He says, as Zohar says, that is the level of Shivcha. So in other words, Malchus of Yetzirah serves two roles. It draws down the midas of Yetzirah, which come from the midas of Atzilus, and second, it prepares the meal, and that's the Shivcha. The Zohar says, Mishna Issa Dahu Nar V'ihi, and that level is Shivcha de Shechinta. That's two names. Is the Isha of Nar, and it is the Shivcha of the Shechina. But we're going to learn now inside. You'll see more details. I think it'll become clear. So it says like this now.
Because it says
let's read. Let's learn the whole piece inside. It should become clear when we do that. So just be patient and let's see if it all clarifies after we learn the details. I'm going back to the parentheses, like 8 lines from the top of the page. 7 lines. So just be patient. Hold your question. If you still have a question, hold it, and you'll see. Let's see how he explains. So he says now like this. Earlier we learned, and earlier means 2 pages back, on 1368, the Mishna b'Yisrael al derech Esek HaTeira b'Gan Eden. He said Mishna Yetzirah is like Esek HaTeira b'Gan Eden, because he asked the question, doesn't Mishna come down into Asiyah? If you go back to that page, he said, Ika sheyeh b'Asiyah. The whole point of Mishna is to bring it into action. That's Asiyah. However, he explained, Ha'orav is Galashal Mishnah. But the revelation of Mishnah, what is its unique thing, is not just bringing it into action. The revelation of it is all the details that it talks about. That's Yetzirah. And he gave the example of like when someone learns Mishnah in Gan Eden, you can't compare it to someone who learns Mishnah in Asiyah. When we learn Mishnah in Asiyah, we're learning the same Mishnah, but the Neshamas and Gan Eden are learning it in far more, let's call it more revelatory fashion. So he's saying now like this, based on what we said earlier, Mishnah is Yetzirah, so he's going to explain a little more what that means. That means the Gan Eden of Elim Yetzirah. We know there's levels of Gan Eden. There's Gan Eden Yetzirah, there's Gan Eden in Bria, there's even a level in Gan Eden Asiyah, I believe. So he's qualifying. He's saying, based on that, that means it's more ruchnius. And you're coming to explain it's the shifcha that brings it down into gashmis. Didn't we learn earlier that the Mishnah is the Yetzirah, that it's not quite gashmis, it's much more ruchni. It also comes down in gashmis, but Mishnah in its pure form is in the Yetzirah and ruchnius. So he's explaining, so he's saying that's true. Compared to Asiyah, it's more ruchnius. But compared to Primis HaTeira and Atzilus, the way Teira is in Atzilus, the way the Mishnah and Yetzirah, that is more gashmizdik. Now what he means by gashmiz, it means it has more substance. So Mishnah, the way, if we only learn Teira as it is in Atzilus, we would not have details, like it would be Mikra. We wouldn't be able to derive from it how to actually do mitzvahs in this world. So though the Mishnah itself is a revelation that's not pure action, because there's explanation and there's the details as we discussed. So it's not just a narrative form like it is in Mikra, but nevertheless, it's already now taking on more substance than there is the way it is Primis HaTeira Shebatzilus. Or Kamesha Kosa Bekisra Arizal. Like it's written in the writings of the Arizal, but Piris Val Teiroscho Shalamadetonu. Teirasecha. Your Teira. What it means, your Teira that we learn. So the Arizal asks, what does that mean? Should say Allah Teira. What is a Teirasecha? So he says Teirasecha is Teira Datzilus Shalamadetonu Teira Sabriya. That we in Bria, Teira Sabriya is learning your Teira in Atzilus. So in other words, the Teira originates in Atzilus. And there it's in a much more sublime and much more divine level. And we are learning that Teira is being drawn into Teira Sabriya. So So we see from this that Teira Satzilus is called your Teira, meaning it's closer in the sense it's less, has less garments, and it's much more revealed God's Teira with the godliness in it. The Efshar Kavona, and perhaps the Kavona is al Mishnah Kamoshi Lamato. Behind the Mishnah be Yetzirah, B'chinas Vov Ksav is the Yetzirah. So you say maybe the Kavona is this, that the way the Mishnah comes down Lamata, which means Mishnah the Yetzirah is Vov Ksav is the Yetzirah, the 6 facets of Yetzirah, or Kamoshi Yoda Lamata in the Slapsha Begashmish, him B'chinas Malchus the Yetzirah, Isasa the Hainab. So the way it comes down and manifests in Gashmius, in a way that we can relate to it in a gashmistic way. What are exactly the halachas? What makes a carbon kosher? What makes it not kosher? That's all a very physical manifestation of the ideas of the Torah. So that's Malchus Yetzirah Issa Dahainar. So here clearly saying that's the Issa Dahainar. So Malchus gives it more substance. So it's originating from Vov Ksavis of the Yetzirah, which in turn originate from Vov Ksavis of Zah of Atzilus. And now it's coming down through Malchus Issa Dahainar. Nad is Zah of Atzilus. So Issa Dahainar. Yeah. Okay. So that's what he just said now in explaining this role of Mishna. So it's not quite like it's in Atzilus, but it's also higher than it is in Asiya, though it informs how we should behave in Asiya. So he says, Mareches Mem Islamet Ches. So Me'er is a sefer from Rameir Papirish. Mentioned it many times. It's like a Kabbalistic encyclopedia. Very reliable, very authoritative. Chassidus quotes it extensively, but it's like written in Erchin, like entries. So the entry Mem Ois Lamed Ches is probably Mishnah. So he says V'zel Kosav. This is what he writes. V'zel Shene. He's actually quoting the exact citation. Mishnah Vov Ktsovas HaYetzirah Shivche de Matranisa. Mishnah is the six facets of Yetzirah. Shivcha, the maidservant of Matranisa, of the queen. Mashma, the Yetzirah Bechlali B'china Shivcha de Matranisa. So based on this, he doesn't say it's Malchus. So it's mashma from this, from the Moira that Yetzirah in general is the level of Shivcha de Matranisa, because he says Mishnah is the six facets, Shivcha de Matranisa, and that's the level of the Shivcha. B'sham, I'm trying to remember. I remember that I had an issue with this the first time also, what he means. Let me just see something. Bottom of page 1365, he brought this also. 1 second. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, at the end of the paragraph on page 1365, she says, I want to look it up in the Ma'ir itself. I don't have it here.
Maybe Shem Neshama, Mishnah and Neshama, the name Neshama versus Nefesh and Ruach.
Yeah, I'm not sure the Vishem, whether it's Visam or Vishem Neshama, because remember, Mishnah is also the letters Neshama.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Shem Neshama Lahem Kelim Etzaim, the Nukva Datilas Veitzira Mishnah.
Yeah, but what's the word? How do you read the word Lahem? That's the problem I'm having. How do you read
Maybe
Lahem?
because it's Bia is Bria Yetzirah Asiya, and then it's Nefesh Ruach Neshama, so they correlate with each other.
But how do you read the word Lahem? Shem
Lahem,
Neshama Lahem?
Lahem Neshama and Yetzirah, or whatever world corresponds with Neshama.
Read to me in English. What is Lahem? How do you translate?
To them?
To whom?
To that world of Yetzirah, whatever world corresponds with Neshama.
So Vishem Neshama Lahem. What does that mean?
The Vav K'tavos? I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know.
That's what I'm struggling with. I'm not sure if it's Vishem or Visam Neshama. Shem Neshama.
Maybe he's referring to the midos.
Okay, 1365.
Maybe he's referring to Zah, the midos. Although it should be Lahan with the Nun Sophie.
I want to see it inside the Ma'era, to be honest. That would be safest. I remember I had the same issue when we read it the first time. I'm trying to remember how I figured it out. I may have looked it up. Let me just see something on the bottom of page.
Contextually, it seems like the midos.
Just a moment, please.
If Atzilus is neshama, then the midos of Atzilus are the kelim.
Okay, I'm going to look it up in the Ma'er because it's exact language from there, and I want to see how he said what the word there is. If I recall correctly, when I looked there, I found the pshat. Well, bottom of page 1365, he explained that there's kelim pnimim, emtsoim, and chitzenim. There's the 30 kelim in Atzilus, if you may recall. So he said there's the 10 inner ones, Chabad, of Elam Abriya, Emtsoyim is Yetzirah, the 10 middle containers, and then the 10 outer containers. So he's definitely Shem, I'm not sure the Shem or Sham Neshama Lahem, Shem Neshama Lahem. Kelim Emtsoyim, the Nukvid Atzilus. So is it referring to the 10 internal containers? Let me read it as I see it. So the Nukvidat Silus, like he said earlier on page 1365, the Yetzirah is Mishna Lamelech. So Mishna, in the inner dimension of Mishna, probably the neshama of Mishna, is the inner container, the middle containers in Malchus of Atzilus. Yetzirah is a Mishna Lamelech, means like the viceroy, the second in command. V'chein Shem Atat. And the same thing, the Mishna Lamelech, from the word Mishna. Mishna means like an assistant, a Mishna, the second two. V'chein Shem Atat. We learned before Matat is Sarah Shel that's the level of Zoh of Yetzirah. The Ika Shem Zeh Benukva Di Yetzirah. It's definitely V'shem Neshama Lahem. It's clearly saying that. I'm just trying to figure out what he means here by all these different levels. Shem Neshama Lahem Kelim Emtsoyim Denukva Atzilus. V'ika Shem Zeh Benukva Di Yetzirah. Okay. Well, in other words, it's not just the Yetzirah in general, but the main thing is the Nukva Di Yetzirah.
Why is Lahem not just the midos
because I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I want to look it up in the Ma'er to see. I don't want to guess. I don't know.
Contextually, that seems to be what it's talking about. That the midos of the neshama of the midos of the midos of Atzilus or the neshama of the midos of Yetzirah, and they get born through Malchus. Malchus of Atzilus.
I am not clear what this means, so I'm going to look it up, as I said, and I'll get back to everybody about it. V'nikra shivcha l'gabe sherush l'moker primis hatera, and it's called a maidservant compared to the root and source of the inner Torah, shezeu b'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus. That's Malchus of Atzilus. So Malchus of Atzilus is the level, the pnimis atzim satera k'meishu b'Malchus d'Atzilus bli levush nikra gvirta. The level of the inner and core of Torah, way it's Malchus of Atzilus without a garment. In other words, it's not yet manifest in Yetzirah. That's called gvirta. That's like the queen, the woman. Ukomeshin slapsha b'seisa amadreges. Hainu b'chochma shel halachas hamadabrim binyan gashmim nikra shivcha legaba primis. And when it manifests, b'seisa amadreges, meaning that's an expression from this Maimon, in the concealed b'seisa amadreges as it gets concealed in the levels, meaning the chochma of halachas as it speaks about physical matter, then it's called shivcha relative to the primis of atzilus. Ba'afal pikein teira achasi, and nevertheless, God forbid, it's not two different teiras, it's all one teira. Amitis aprimis anikra gvirta ima Mishna, that the true inner primis, which is called gvirta, like the queen, Malchus of Atzilus, is one with the Mishna, which is called shivcha, or issa dahainar, as it manifests in Yetzirah, or Malchus of Yetzirah. Ukomeshehira chashalah. Like the Shalah elaborates, B'Hagdama be'inyan Beis HaChochmah. The inyan of Beis HaChochmah is one of the sections in the introduction of the Shalah. Shatei ikrihi beruchnius. The Torah is primarily a spiritual document, entity. B'nizgashmo bo b'inyanim gashmim. And then it assumed substance and manifests in physical matters. V'akol echad mamish. And it's all one. So even though the Torah speaks about, let's say, tzitzis with physical wool, or tefillin with physical parchment, a sukkah made out of physical materials, and the same with all the mitzvahs, especially the action-based, but the physical ones. So all of that is an outer garment to inner level. So essentially what the Zohar is saying is Mishna is the outer garment, Isisa Dahinar, which is the Shivcha, that brings it down into a more Gashmistic level, which relative to Asiya is still more sublime. But relative to Atzilus, the Primus Ateirin Atzilus is taken on substance. And that's the substance of what the Mishnah talks about, all the dinim and prote dinim. Mishnah Malchusa, the Gemara. That's why the Mishnah is called the queen in the Gemara. Lias kamitis etzma primis the chachma shava Malchus. That's Baba Mishnah. He just says it's called Shivcha, because the truth is they're all one. Because the Amitis, Etzema Primis the Chachma, when you're learning Chachma of Malchus of Atzilus, even though through the garment of Zah and Malchus of Yetzirah, that comes in Mishnah, that should be slapshus, b'levush Malchus Yetzirah, shalavush bavad, nikra Shivcha. So the truth is, Mishnah, you're really learning the Torah from Atzilus. However, it's coming in a garment, and the garment itself, he says, is called Shivcha. So even though Mishnah is called Shivcha, it means Mishnah is called Shivcha because it's manifesting the garment of the Shivcha, in contrast to the way it is in Atzilus without that garment. V'yadua, the liba gazba b'shivcha kain etzem echad. So we learned this as well, that she was that she was upset. This was, I think, he's talking about Sarah with Hagar, I believe, or is it Leah with Zilpah? I don't remember. It's one of the Emois with
Hagar.
Hagar. The liba gazba b'shivchasa, that she was like upset with her. Shivcha kihein etzem echad, because they're like one entity, they're like one essence. And now he goes, but I said before, v'gam nikra Malchus Yetzirah Shivcha k'moshe derech hashivcha l'sakem acholam arevim l'gvirta. And Malchus is also called Shivcha. The first reason he said because it's like a garment, it's an additional garment, even though it's one with, the shvaches, the maidservants were one; they were an extension of their so-called masters. But also Shivcha, because of Shivcha l'sakem echol marevin l'gvirta. She prepares sweet foods for her master, for the maid, for the woman of the house. Kach inyan tikkun ha'macholim inyan birurim netzutzos. So tikkun ha'macholim, what is that? Beruchni is spiritually, that's the birurim netzutzos, the separation and the clarity and the elevation of the sparks that are trapped and embedded. Shenoflu b'shviras hakel and b'klippas nega. They fell through the shattering of the containers in klippas nega, and the job of birur is to extract them, just like you extract food from the excess, or you extract the excess from food. So it's birurim. So the avodah b'shivcha is birurim. Yedua the bascholas eitzadas hu be'elam haYetzirah. Bascholas eitzadas hu be'elam Yetzirah. As eitzadas began in the world of Yetzirah. Commercial custom mokamacher being chesed gvura megulim. Chesed gvura megulim. That's eitzadas tevara. Bimkein habirah idei malchus Yetzirah. Behind idei mishnayis. So therefore, the birur that's through Malchus of Yetzirah, which is through Mishnayos, what does it do? It tells us what is kosher, the tahir, and what is pure, umutter, and permitted, who Allah sanitzus lichla b'kedusha. Its job is elevating the spark to be encompassed in kedusha, and that's the job of the shivcha. So in Atzilus, the Torah is still in a place that's higher than Birurim, because it hasn't come down yet into a state where you need to create that clarity. There, everything is clear. Mikra, everything is clear. But when we come in this world and we want to understand how do you implement what the Torah says, the written Torah, you need Mishna to clarify it all. And that clarification, that birur, is the pratim that are in the Mishnah. That is called Shivcha de Shechinta, the Shivcha of Shechina of Malchus of Atzilus. So that's how he explains this whole idea. So basically, it seems to me that besides the Ma'ir, which needs more explanation, and there he seems to talk about, because there he just brings Shivcha de Matronisa, that there's two aspects going on here. One is Malchus, one is Malchus of Yetzirah, is called, like he says, Isasa dahu nar. What is nar? Nar, we said, was Vav Ksav is Zav Atzilus, of Yetzirah, which manifests Zav Atzilus. So Issa dahu nar is what? Is the Isha, the makabel of that. That's Malchus of Yetzirah. That's Mishnah. Then he explains what's the role of Mishnah, like a shivcha of the Matronisa, like the queen's maidservant. Her job is to take the Torah of that originates in Atzilus and clarify it and bring it down into Gashmias. Like he said, the Levush is called Shivcha. It's all one with the original Torah. She's not doing something separate. Like a maidservant working for her master is not doing her own job. She's working for her. And she's manifesting what the queen or the Gvirta wants to achieve, but bring it down into the clarity that's needed, the birur of the Macholim or birur of Elam Haza, which is what Mishnah does, creates that type of clarity. That's briefly what he said here in this paragraph. Okay. As I said, I want to look up the Ma'ir to understand exactly what he's saying.
So in simple language, what does it mean that Mishnah is Yetzirah? That when a person is studying Mishnah, he could reach the Yetzirah and not higher? What does it mean, all of these things? Mikra,
exact
Mishnah.
opposite. Mikra is beyond our ability to really see the revealed details of the Torah. That's why in Mikra you only have the stories and you have the mitzvahs, like he said, just the action. It says put on film, put on tzitzis, build a sukkah. Mishnah, Yetzirah, from the word surah, brings it into Giluyim. Spoke a whole arichas. If you go back, the bottom of page 1366, he said, now we can get the full expression of what the Torah means. So whatever's merum is in the mikra, that only comes in a Maisa form and without details, in Mishnah, because midas tatzil is shachas ala elemis. So you have to go back to page 1366 and 1367. So Yetzirah is a world, what he calls Alkem Chinas Hamidis Shechem Liz Bizgalus Be'elam Yetzirah Lechem Avur B'Mishnah Kol HaProtim B'Ischalkus Asher Beivik Gezeh Kosher HaKorban V'Yochal Is V'Lichl Be'erein Sof. So we're learning now is continuing what we learned earlier. He's not coming saying something new. He's just now applying it to the Zohar about the Shivcha de Shechinta. But if you go back to page 1360, bottom of 1366 and 1367, there he speaks about it more in detail. How the Mishna is nizbaya prota in yonim. So Yetzirah is essentially a gilui of what in Atzilus remains still removed from us, and can only in Mikra can only be expressed in very brief terms and in a very story form. In Mishnah, it now comes alive in the whole expression of it. So now he's explaining how that works. Like we said, Chabad, like Zokin, is Daitis Sosim. It's higher than Midas. The Zokin is removed. Atik and Kesser are removed from existence. Midas govern existence. Like he said, it's the Seder and Hogas Elam of Schar and Einish and so on comes to Chesed and Gvura as it manifests in Yetzirahs where it really takes on shape and form. So Mishnah basically is the Torah, not just Torah as it is in Atzilus, Primis Torah, with Torah Secha, like he called it. The Primis Torah, that's higher than manifestation. You want the Torah to be able to be applied to our lives here. If it remains removed, we can't apply it. So Mishnah is applying the Torah into, Yetzirah is applying it into existence, and therefore it's the level of Yetzirah, namely Malchus of Yetzirah, and it's called Isasa Dahinar Shivcha the Shechina. We'll soon learn about Talmud, but before Talmud, we're going to learn about Braisa. But what we learned about Mishnah, because Mishnah is obviously the whole Talmud is coming to explain Mishnah, but the Mishnah is the first place of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's what the Tanoim, when they wrote it down, Rabbeinu HaKodesh documented Torah Sheba'al Peh, that all the things that were taught based on the Torah and the written Torah, as they hidden over all the years, when they explained Torah b'pirusha nitna, b'pirusha is Mishnah. I mean Mishnah and Talmud, but Mishnah primarily because that's where it all begins. So Mishnah essentially is a gilui, and a gilui that it can manifest in a way that we can relate to it more, and that is the role of it, and that's why it's called all these levels. So yeah. Probably Shem Neshama Lahem. That it's given the name Neshama, like he said, because Neshama, like he said from Ageres HaKedesh, Era Neshama de Biyah. So Neshama,
Probably.
so Mishnah is Asius Neshama. So it's the Neshama from Malchus of Atzilus comes Neshama, that's the Kelim of the Nukvid Atzilus. Yeah. Yetzirah.
It's the manifestation of the neshama of the Bzav Atzilus.
Not exactly. I would say that if you go back on page 1365, he brings from the Ageres HaKedesh that says that from Malchus of Atzilus comes the 30 Kelim of Biyah, and he said 30 Kelim. 30 Kelim. So it's from Malchus of Atzilus comes the 30 Kelim. And he calls it Eir HaNeshama de Biyah. So that's what he's referring to, the Neshama Biyah. But in that itself, the 30, there's 10 that are the inner Kelim, that's in Bria. There's 10 that are the middle Kelim, and that's in Yetzirah, that's in Neshama. So Neshama Biyah is the middle Kelim of Malchus of Atzilus, the 10 middle Kelim that originate from Malchus of Atzilus manifests in Yetzirah, and that's the Eir Neshama. So that's why it's called Neshama, the same letters as Mishnah, and we see this Mishnah Lamelech Shem Atat Shem Beikar Shem, and it's not just in general Yetzirah. He says Beikar, the name is in Malchus of Yetzirah, Nukvad Yetzirah.
Maybe also the word Mishnah Lamelech is like Shivcha, like it's not exactly the Gvirta, the Melech.
Mishnah is the letter. Mishnah is the word Mishnah from the word Mishnah. Like that's why he's using Mishnah.
Right. But I'm saying it's the same idea as second in command, like Mishnah.
Maybe not. Not sure about that, but okay, possible. But he does call it Shivcha de Shechinta, so yeah, the Matronisa.
Shivcha Mishnah. Oh.
Okay.
The second one, really.
So that
really
concludes
means
the paragraph
Sheni,
on page
from the word
13.
Sheni.
That concludes the paragraph on page 1370. Okay, any questions?
So right now you're contending that lahem refers to these 30 kalim, and he says, repeats the word again. These kalim are intermediaries that are born that happen through nukva of a Malchus of Atzilus. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because that's what he says at the bottom of 1365. So it's he said it already, different words. Lahem would be the Kalim Emtsoim.
Yes.
So we're leaving Atzilus out of it completely. We're just dealing with Bia?
No, we're not leaving it out. It says Akol Achas. Everything starts from Atzilus. It all starts, Torah starts in Atzilus, like he said, Torah Secha, Shalimad Tanu. So the Torah of Atzilus is informing, it's like anything, and then the Torah manifests in garments. So if you go back to the highest levels, the Torah is pure Ruchnius. You know, when you think about the Torah in the highest worlds, it doesn't talk, even though it talks in the language of man, but we know Torah Medaberes B'Yem, like he said from the Shalah, that language is not one that is about the physical world. Like Tzitz is there would mean maybe the Hamshacha of Yesod and Malchus, for example. But in Mishna, when it starts spelling it out, in Halachas, starts taking on shape and form that we can follow these laws in Gashmis. So this is basically explaining the dynamics of how Torah is nishtalshul, evolves from a more spiritual and sublime state into a more manifest state that can relate to the material of existence. In a sense, when we say, for example, that chesed is the root of water and gvura is the root of fire, so we know chesed and gvura is not water and fire, but it's the archetype from which will evolve water and fire as it assumes more external garments. It's like anything, like a moshel and a nimshel. You know, you could talk about an idea in abstract form, and then when you start giving it shape, that's what Yetzirah means. Yetzirah means you start giving it shape and form. So it's not that abstract. It's starting to take on garments that we can, like handles that we can relate to. That's essentially what he's explaining here.
So I'm sorry, let me just process for a second. So our Olam HaAsiya is the most concealed world, and therefore it corresponds with Mikra, which is the most concealed. And then the second one is...
I wouldn't quite put it that way, but the way he put it was because Mikra is such a high level of the divine, the only way it could be expressed down below.
It's concealed. It's the most concealed form of Torah.
That's not the way the Mimer puts it. The Mimer said it in if you want the exact language, let's go back to the bottom of page 1365. He said, because it's rooted, the only way, it only comes into expression of Asiya. That's the word he uses. So I'm trying to be precise to the way he describes it. Mishna, on the other hand, is the Gili of Chagas, so therefore in Yetzirah it comes in a more Gilidic way. Yeah.
So the Kalim and the Or kind of relate to each other a little more. So what happens with Bria?
We didn't get to Bria. We'll get to it. The Rebbe Rashab is very patient and he step by step.
So the neshama is the Mishnah, the level of Yetzirah is the Mishnah, and that's the second to Asiya, to Torah's Mikra.
Well, we started with Mikra and Asiya, Mishnah and Yetzirah, and then there's going to be later. If you go further, you'll see.
So it's a second to the Mikra. It's a second to the bottom one. Okay.
Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud are the three levels.
Yeah. Okay.
And right now we're still in the middle of we're finishing Mishnah. And from Mishnah is going to go to Bryce and then to Talmud.
So that means that
the Talmud will be on page 1372, Talmud.
It's explaining the levels of these three things. It does not mean that when a person is learning Mishnah, it will definitely bring him to the level of Yetzirah.
Well, why not? I mean, you are essentially learning something from the Gili of Yetzirah, the Fierech. Obviously, we're learning it in Asiya, so it's Yetzirah within Asiya. But Mikra, you could say you're accessing Asiya, which accesses Chabad. In Mishnah, you're accessing Yetzirah, which is connected to Chagas. And Talmud, is going to be Nihi, but it's going to be rooted in and it's going to connect to Bria, as we're going to learn.
To Bria and not Yetzirah, which means that it cannot go too low.
Well, let's wait till we learn that inside about Talmud and Bria. It's a whole discussion of its own. Let's go step by step here. Right now we've covered Mikra and Mishnah. And I'll read a few more lines because the next paragraph I think really belongs connected to the earlier paragraph, whatever they divided it here. The Klolos Ha'inyan. Here it's a new paragraph, but let me just read it because it's a conclusion of Klolos Ha'inyan K'mashkazu Priyetz Chaim Shehu V'Le'il. And the general inyan in all of this, and he's summing up now the Priyetz Chaim that was discussed earlier. Remember on page 1365, on top of the page, we started, what did he say? The Mikra and Mishna, Kulam Hein Malchus. Mikra and Mishna are all in Malchus. Difference between Malchus of Asiya or Malchus of Yetzirah. Mishna she begins Malchus the Yetzirah Shoshu b'chagas dezah. And Mishna, which is now Malchus of Yetzirah, as we just explained, Shivcha, Itzur Daunar, Shivcha de Shechina, that's rooted in Chagas of Zah, Datzilus. Hamislab is Malchus Datzilus, that manifests within Malchus of Atzilus, which in turn, or Malchus Datzilus, Mislab Shepres, Bechinas Vav, Tzav is the Yetzirah. And Malchus of Atzilus then manifests into the 6 facets of Yetzirah. The Efshe Shazeu, he slapshes the Zah. So here comes yet another twist. The Rebbe Rashab says, maybe this is the slapshus of Zah. I think what he's saying is the Vav Ksavas of Yetzirah, is that only going through Malchus, or it also relates to the Zah of Atzilus? And remember, in the previous page, he said it's Zah Atzilus manifesting in Zah of Yetzirah, or Vav Ksavas the Yetzirah. So I think he wants to say that it's not just going through Malchus, it also carries something from Zah of Atzilus. So it's traveling through Malchus for sure. Everything travels through Malchus. But it still retains something from the personality, which makes sense, because Zah, the Midas in Bria, originate from the Midas of Atzilus, even when they travel through Malchus. And same thing, the Midas of Yetzirah, that's what I think he's saying. Malchus the Atzilus mislabes becomes Vav Ksavas the Yetzirah. Or you could say it a little differently. You could say maybe he means Efsheh slapshus the Zah. Maybe it's the slapshus of Zah of Yetzirah into Malchus of Yetzirah. You can learn it both ways. I think the first way I said is more accurate. And then he continues, but Malchus the Yetzirah, the Sham, whose galus HaMishna be'elam HaYetzirah canal. So manifests in Vav Ksav is the Yetzirah, which is a slapshus of Zah, and in Malchus of Yetzirah, where there is this galus of Mishna be'elam HaYetzirah canal. So Mishna is revealed where? In Malchus of Yetzirah. But it's drawing from the Vav Ksavis of Zav Yetzirah. That's the Shisa Sidre Mishnah, the 6 Storim of the Vav Ksavis of Malchus from the Vav Ksavis of Zav, which in turn takes from Malchus of Atzilus, which in turn takes from Zav Atzilus. That covers what Mishnah is. That's why I feel this few lines really belongs to the end. And then the next section, Omnam Braisa, starts a new topic. Because after Mishnah comes Braisa, and we'll talk about that in the next class, what Braisa is. But first, let's just finish up what he said about Mishnah. So it is somewhat of a dense section and piece, but I always like to bring it back to, let's just think of the bigger picture here. We're getting beyond the Kabbalistic terminology of Yetzirah and Malchus Yetzirah and Zah and Shivcha and Isasa. Basically, it comes down to simple English, is that Mishnah is the Torah being drawn down to a level that gets more defined in a way that we can live by the Torah. Because like I said, take for example Shema. So the Torah says we should say Shema, and you can say Shema twice a day. So that says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But you need a Mishnah to tell you when do you say Shema? What time? And the same thing with every mitzvah that the Mikra says briefly, the Mishnah comes and elaborates and breaks it down. So essentially, in the context of what we're learning interface, the Torah is a beautiful Torah, but if Hashem did not put Torah into kavim, into structures that relate to the shinuyim of this world, after the different ups and downs, the different changes, a day and night, and all the other aspects, everything would remain very spiritual. Like he said, Pnimius HaTorah. You know, for example, the Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot are 3 holidays that are particular days of the year. In Ruchnius, they're higher than time, just to give an example. So in Mishnah, it comes down into a specific details of Erla Arba Asar, beginning of Masechta Pesachim, when do you begin to bake the chametz? It brings it down into time and space in a way that we can relate to it. That's essentially what he's saying, as I said in simple English. He's just giving us the whole technical background behind it, so it's all grounded in all the sources. But that's really what Mishnah does. So on one hand, Mishnah is rooted not in a higher place as high as Mikra, but on the other hand, it's in a Giludika place, in Chagas. And Chagas manifests the Yetzirah in all these details that Mishnah elaborates upon. Okay. I am going to stop here, but any questions, comments? Keep in mind as well, as I mentioned a number of times, volume 3, in contrast to volume 2 and 1, was written once by the Rebbe Rashab. The others, we have at least 5 iterations. The Rebbe Rashab wrote it, then he added material to it, then he gave it to a Maitik to copy it, and then the Rebbe Rashab added more. Then he added summaries and chapter numbers. So we have several, at least 4 or 5 times that the Rebbe Rashab went over it and added to it. The 3rd volume doesn't have chapters, doesn't have Maimorim. There's not even a breakdown of Maimorim. Also, the first 2 volumes were also delivered by the Rebbe Rashab. He spoke them. So it's not surprising that there things are far more fleshed out. And here, often, you could see times that I'm convinced that if the Rebbe Rashab had gone over this a 2nd time, a 3rd time, not that what it says here is not accurate. You see the first version of volume 1, volume 2, it also is all perfect, but it's very condensed, very dense. So I'm convinced that if the Rebbe Rashab had gone over it and made chapters and broke it down with the chapters with kitzurim and summaries and so on, this would probably have been much more developed and much longer. But this is what we have, and we're working our way through it. And especially now in context, again, if anybody wants more on this, I would suggest going back to my first time I taught it, because there I went through much more detail. Here I'm doing it less in detail because I want to stick to the bigger picture and the flow, as we've discussed a number of times. Just wanted to add that. Okay. Any questions?
It seems to me that we learned about Mikra. We talked about how it manifested in Asiya in a very, from the Chitzonius of Chabad of Atzilus. Excuse me, Nehi of Atzilus.
Nehi of Chabad.
Yeah, Nehi of Atzilus. And here we just talked about Mishnah, and it was much more detailed, and there was much more interaction between Atzilus and Yetzirah, because it talked and the manifestation of Atzilus, because it said that the manifestation of Atzilus in Yetzirah is a more pneumistic thing, and so you get a more, how shall I say, personal or direct.
We get more gilui.
Yeah, and so here we have a lot more details about how that gilui comes about, because we're trying to understand that direct connection, the pneumius of Zav Atzilus, how that pneumius is manifested in Yetzirah. So it's much more detailed, and there's a much tighter integration or hamshacha or hishtalshalus of Zav Atzilus into Zav into Yetzirah generally, specifically Zav Atzilus, and even more specifically a Malchus of Yetzirah. Yeah. So isn't this today what we went through this mostly just the details of how the pneumius of Zav Atzilus is manifest in Yetzirah?
I don't know what you mean by pneumius of Zav Atzilus. I just call it Zav Atzilus. He doesn't use the word pneumius of Zav Atzilus, but Zav Atzilus, yeah. So,
but I mean the manifestation
Zav
of it.
Atzilus,
Yeah.
but that's the point. Yeah, the Chabad of Atzilus manifests in Mikra through Nihi within of Chabad, because it's only the story form, just the tip of the iceberg, whatever you want to call it, and that manifests in Asiya. And now this is exactly what he said here, started at the bottom of page 1366. It says, Mishna Shima Chagas. There you could have Amshochas Etzem Hamidus Chesed Gvura. That's what you mean? Yeah,
yes.
So that's what he says. What you said is exactly what the Mimer says. Yeah.
No, I know, but I'm saying it was much more detailed today, but it's essentially just fleshing out that point that pasuk that you just read.
The Zohar? You mean it's a Sadainar?
Yeah.
Look, I think the Rebbe Rashab explained Mikra enough that needs to be said to understand that. And with Mishnah, he explained what he explained. I think the Rebbe Rashab is using whatever he wants to use to explain these ideas. I don't know if I could explain why some things take 2 pages to explain and some take 6 pages to explain. But it's far from over. There's plenty more to go. He's going to go back to Mikra. He's going to go back to Mishnah. But first he's going to go to Braisa and Talmud. And this is going to go a good few pages until page 1386, where he goes back to the 3 Eira Makabel. Yeah.
I still have some difficult to understand. Is it better for a person to learn Mishnah because it will bring him more internal to the ideas than Mikra, that he will be so-called more superficial?
Yeah, but we have a Maimar Chazal, La'ela Mishalash Adam, right? You're supposed to learn Shlish Mikra, Shlish Mishnah, Shlish Talmud. There's halachas about this. We're supposed to learn them all 3. They're all part of Torah. I don't know if there's a competition here. Not one is better than the other. It's like, right? Shlish Mikra, Shlish Mishnah, that's what it says. It's in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, that says you're supposed to divide your learning into 3. Now in yeshiva, when you're younger years, you learn more ben Chomesh LeMikra. Then comes Mishnah and Gemara. You learn more years, you learn more time, Mishnah and Talmud. But the same thing even in the Temchet Mimim. Chassidus was only an hour and a half in the morning, hour and a half at night. The most of the day was Shas. It was Gemara. And the Gemara itself, Liyuna, the Girsa. Bottom line is, I think it's all Kotera Achas, like he said. And it's different experiences. You want to Benoha and the Mila de Omer Kra, remember everything in Mishnah and Torah Shabbat is grounded in the written Torah. On the other hand, 3 times a week we read the Torah, Shabbos and Monday and Thursday. So you see, Mikra plays a tremendous Shnai Mikra Chatargum. I think each one has their particular role to play, and it's all part of one Torah Achas. Anyone learning properly Mishnah can't learn Mishnah without looking at the Pasuk, because Mishnah is explaining the Psukim. Everything's based on the Pasuk, and vice versa. You can't understand the Psukim without Torah b'Pirusha Nitno. But there's many Chazal that talk about the mile of learning Mishnah. It says Ein Golius Miskansis Ela B'Schus HaMishnayis, for example. The mile of learning, each one has its mile. Each one has its role to play. The way I would put it.
In the Sicha for Hey Teves, Parshas Miketz, I think it was, the Rebbe was talking about the the captives, the books that are the captives. And he was saying Tzion b'mishpat tipade v'shaveh b'tzedakah. And b'mishpat tipade was referring to Dafka Mishnah. He was saying it's so important to learn Mishnah. He made a huge emphasis on learning
Well, I'll
Mishnah.
say mishpat refers to halachas, which is Mishnah. Yeah, mishpat. Yeah, it's a
But
ma'ameh
maybe
chazal. But not just Hey Tevis. It's also this period of year is Tzima Mishpat Tepad is the Haftarah of Shabbos Chazain. A lot of emphasis. That's why we learn.
in other words, to redeem the captives, tipade, like to redeem the books, to redeem the captives. The Mishnah is what to do.
Each has their quality. The Rebbe was not saying not to learn Gemara. He was talking. Each one has their thing that has to be emphasized.
But maybe it correlates, like the Gemara is the longest, and so people spend the most time on it. The Mikra is the shortest, so people spend less time just saying it. And the Mishnah is in the middle. It's like even here in the Rebbe Rashab, he spends just as far as we just learned. Like he spends a little time on Mikra, a little more time on Mishnah, and like 4 pages on Gemara.
That's what Rabbi Yitzchak was suggesting. I don't know if I would say that, but that's possible. And as far as Hemshech Ayin Beis goes, I would suggest the Rebbe Rashab is saying whatever he wants to say, as much as if he needed to explain Mikra more at length, he would have spent more 10 pages on it. I don't know if it was intentional that he's only speaking about it briefly because Mikra is brief. I don't know if, I mean, he could say that maybe in Achsidische Farbrengen as a Hergish. I don't know if that's actually reflected, because there are topics that he speaks about tremendous length when it's necessary. Anyway, but who knows? Maybe there is something to be said about that. Okay, so we'll
Where does
stop here.
Hasidus come in? The learning of Hasidus, is that Atzilus?
That's for another discussion, not for now. That look in Likutei Torah, the Maimer Leshash Bris Melech in the Sazria talks about it. Kabbalah, it talks about where's Kabbalah. Is Kabbalah part of Mikra, Kabbalah part of Talmud? So there's a discussion about that. Primis Ateri, where that goes. Here we said Primis Ateri, referred to Atzilus. There's also Pshat, Remez, Drusad. Remember that? 4 dimensions. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. Close to the bottom of page 1370. Anybody else wants to ask anything? Any other questions, comments?
Is there a class tomorrow? You said there was some
No,
shaila
no class
about that.
tomorrow. There won't be a class tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll
Resuming on
resume
Tuesday?
on Tuesday. We'll zoom on Tuesday. Yeah.
Thank you.